Hello, family. Enjoy this great and beautiful moment with Afri Stories. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and comment. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and don't miss future videos from us. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Olivia Reed took a shaky breath as she stepped off the rattling bus, gazing up at the ornate, wrought-iron gates of the Blackwood Estate. The morning fog hovered around her ankles, sending an unexpected chill through her. She clutched a piece of paper with the address scrawled in bold letters, feeling more like an intruder than a newly hired housekeeper. All her life, she had struggled to pay bills and care for her ailing mother. This job was her one chance at financial stability. As she pressed the buzzer, a security camera whirred, zeroing in on her. The gate creaked open with an ominous groan. She gathered her courage and stepped inside, following a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. The mansion emerged from behind a cluster of trimmed hedges, an imposing structure of gray stone and towering spires. Olivia could practically taste the hush enveloping the place. The windows were dark, as though no one lived there, yet she knew it was far from abandoned. At the grand double doors, she was greeted by Mrs. Fletcher, the head housekeeper, an older woman whose posture was as rigid as a soldier's. Her hair was neatly pulled into a tight bun, and her face revealed a mixture of exhaustion and caution. "You must be Miss Reed," Mrs. Fletcher said briskly. "Come inside, leave your coat on the rack, and we'll begin the tour immediately." Olivia followed her across the glossy marble floors. Tall ceilings rose overhead, illuminated by a chandelier that resembled a cluster of glowing teardrops. Everything sparkled, from the polished banisters to the gilded frames of old family portraits. "I expect you've heard of Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Fletcher continued, not meeting Olivia's gaze. "You'll address him as Mr. Blackwood, or Sir, if you ever encounter him. But under no circumstances should you seek him out. You are to do your job without disturbing him." Olivia nodded, her stomach knotting. Damien Blackwood was a name that inspired both awe and terror in the business world. He was rumored to be as cold as the polished floors beneath her feet and as merciless as the harsh winter winds. Mrs. Fletcher led her through the labyrinth of corridors, pointing out the library, the dining hall, the conservatory, and the staff quarters. Despite the estate's grandeur, there was a somber emptiness that unsettled Olivia. It felt as if every echo of laughter or warmth had been banished. Finally, they ascended a sweeping staircase that led to multiple landings. "Your responsibilities will be on the first and second floors," Mrs. Fletcher informed her, halting before another, narrower staircase that disappeared into the shadows. "That is the third floor, where Mr. Blackwood's private rooms are located. No one goes up there, ever." She fixed Olivia with a penetrating stare, ensuring she understood the gravity of this rule. Olivia swallowed hard, nodding, understood. Once the tour concluded, Olivia was handed a uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron. She changed in the staff quarters and reported to the grand foyer, where she began dusting the ornate tables and statues lining the walls. Although she tried to stay focused, her thoughts kept wandering. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching her from the dark corners of the mansion. As the day wore on, her new colleagues offered brief greetings. Most moved quickly, heads down, as if carrying secrets too heavy to share. The whisper started almost immediately. Stories of staff members who had been fired for the slightest offense, rumors of locked rooms, and the ever-present warning to stay away from the third floor. By mid-afternoon, Olivia found herself in a side hallway. The monotony of polishing surfaces lulled her into a sort of trance, and she failed to notice the delicate sculpture perched on a pedestal until her elbow bumped it. It wobbled precariously. Heart pounding, she lunged forward, but too late. The sculpture teetered and toppled, colliding with a small table. A cup of coffee that had been left there moments earlier splashed all over the priceless artwork. "No, no, no," Olivia whispered, panicking. She scrambled to right the sculpture, patting it frantically with a cloth. Coffee streaks dripped down the figure's pristine curves. Her pulse hammered in her ears, certain that this was it, her first day, and she was already finished. A sharp intake of breath from behind made her whirl around. Standing, there was a man of imposing height and regal bearing. His chiseled features were as cold as carved marble, and his eyes, a steely gray, pinned her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice low and intimidating. Her heart seized as she realized this was Damien Blackwood himself, the one person everyone feared. The billionaire whose name adorned headlines, cautionary tales, and hushed conversations. I'm Olivia Reed," she stammered, her cheeks flooding with heat. "I was just hired as a housekeeper." He said nothing, merely studied her. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flaw laid bare. His silence was worse than anger. It was a dismissal of her very existence. Then, with a barely perceptible shake of his head, he turned and strode away, disappearing into the shadows. Stunned, Olivia stayed rooted to the spot, clutching her cloth in trembling hands. She expected any moment someone would arrive to tell her she was fired. But no one came. Mrs. Fletcher appeared eventually, took in the scene with narrowed eyes, and hurried to help clean the sculpture. Olivia was reprimanded, but curiously, she wasn't dismissed. She found that almost more unnerving than if Damien Blackwood had erupted into fury. His dispassionate gaze had said it all. He simply didn't care enough to bother. That night, as Olivia settled into her small, sparsely furnished room in the staff's wing, she couldn't shake the lingering chill of his presence. Something about the encounter made her realize that this job would be unlike any other, and that Damien Blackwood was a man wrapped in secrets far darker than she could imagine. The next few days felt surreal for Olivia. She woke before dawn to start her duties, methodically cleaning the dusty corridors and rearranging vases filled with rare orchids. Yet the hush of Blackwood Estate persisted like a silent warning. Even the house's electricity seemed subdued, as if any sound above a whisper would anger the quiet halls. On the third morning, she was polishing the banister near the base of the stairs when she felt a gust of cold air and heard music. Soft, melancholic piano notes drifted from above, echoing along the rafters. She froze. The melody had a haunting beauty that made her heart ache. She glanced around to see if any of the other staff noticed, but everyone was busy or simply pretending not to hear. Fearful of breaking the unspoken rules, Olivia returned to her task. That night, however, sleep eluded her. Around midnight, she was jolted awake by the same delicate piano music. It was clearer now, coming from the third floor. Despite her better judgment, she quietly left her room and tiptoed down the corridor. The music resonated from the dark stairwell that led to the forbidden level. Each note nudged her curiosity further, but the warning repeated itself in her mind. No one goes to the third floor. Swallowing her impulse, she returned to bed, though the melody haunted her dreams. The following afternoon, while dusting the library shelves, she heard something else. Childlike laughter. She paused, cocking her head, certain she was mistaken. Yet the laughter rang out again, a gleeful giggle that distinctly belonged to a small boy. Confusion prickled her skin. As far as she knew, there were no children in the mansion. Mrs. Fletcher hadn't mentioned any. She put down her duster and followed the sound into the hallway, then around a corner leading to an old storage area. Suddenly, a small figure darted past her, vanishing behind a curtain. Her breath caught in her throat. Could she have imagined it? Determined to find out, she lifted the heavy curtain and found no one. Feeling foolish, Olivia resumed her duties. Nonetheless, she couldn't escape the sense she was missing pieces of the puzzle. Later that day, she mentioned it discreetly to another maid, whose eyes widened before she quickly changed the subject. It was as if talk of a child was taboo. Each hushed rejection only fueled Olivia's curiosity. That evening, her shift ended earlier than usual, so she decided to explore the mansion's countless hallways. The labyrinthine design threatened to overwhelm her, but she methodically memorized certain markers. A painting of a stormy sea, a row of windows overlooking a neglected rose garden. She turned a corner and noticed a narrow corridor leading to a dimly lit area, clearly rarely used. A giggle rang out again, this time unmistakable. Her pulse quickened as she followed the sound. Small footprints trailed in dust on the marble floor, and she felt a surge of empathy. Whoever this child was, he was likely lonely, hiding in a house where laughter seemed forbidden. She traced the footprints to a closed door. Creak. The door opened under her light push, revealing a forgotten sitting room. Dust motes danced in the dim sunlight filtering through a tall window, and in the center stood a small boy with dark hair and a guarded expression. He couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, his eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and fear. Who are you?" Olivia asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. He eyed her warily. "I'm Lucas," he said at last, twisting his fingers nervously. "Please don't tell my dad." "Your dad?" Realization dawned, though part of her couldn't believe it. Was this child actually Damien Blackwood's son? No one had mentioned he had a child. Rumor was Mr. Blackwood lived alone. Lucas nodded, tears threatening to spill from his wide eyes. "He doesn't like people seeing me. He says it's for my safety." The boy's voice quivered with a sorrow that belied his age. Olivia's heart constricted. "I won't tell," she promised, stepping closer, wary of scaring him. "But are you okay? Do you need anything?" Lucas shook his head. "I have everything I need, except I get bored sometimes." He paused, then looked down at his worn sneakers. "And lonely." An emotion Olivia couldn't name surged in her chest. "Lucas," she said softly, "I'm not supposed to be talking to you, am I?" He shrugged, biting his lip. "Dad doesn't let me out much. He says the world is dangerous. I know he's just worried, but he gets really mad if people come near me. You should go." Her mind reeled. Damien Blackwood had a hidden son, living in the shadows of this enormous estate, guarded like a secret. She was torn between respecting the billionaire's obvious desire for privacy and the ache she felt for Lucas's isolation. "Okay," she whispered, forcing a small smile. "But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'll listen. I promise." Lucas's expression flickered with hope. For a moment, he looked as if he wanted to say more, but then footsteps sounded from the hallway. Fear flashed in his eyes, and he vanished through a side door. Olivia slipped out, returning to her own quarters. That night, as she lay awake, everything weighed heavily on her mind. The midnight piano music, the glimpses of a lonely child, the warnings of staff, all pointed to a man deeply scarred by tragedy. She remembered the heartbreak in Lucas's eyes and imagined how it must feel to be hidden away, kept secret like a shameful memory. Unanswered questions gnawed at her. Why was Damien so fiercely protective, to the extent of keeping his son invisible to the outside world? And what had happened to Lucas's mother? The rumors mentioned a tragedy, but no details were forthcoming. Though she had been warned not to meddle, Olivia couldn't ignore the spark of empathy inside her. She resolved to keep Lucas's secret, but she also knew she couldn't just pretend he didn't exist. If Damien Blackwood was truly as heartless as people claimed, what would he do if he discovered she had met his son? Olivia's routine at the Blackwood Estate settled into a tense rhythm. Each day, she performed her housekeeping tasks while stealing cautious glances up the stairs, wondering if she would glimpse Damien or hear more piano music. Each night, she strained her ears for that haunting melody. Curiously, the music seemed to cease whenever she tried to investigate, despite her better judgment. She found herself seeking out the hidden corners of the estate, half hoping to bump into Lucas again. Nearly a week passed before she caught sight of him, darting across a corridor near an abandoned wing of a mansion. This time, she was quicker. She hurried after him, stepping into a neglected gallery filled with draped furniture and dusty portraits. "Lucas?" she called softly, scanning the dim space. Faint light from a high window revealed a child crouched behind a shrouded sofa, peeking at her with wary eyes. "I told you, you shouldn't be here," he whispered, though there was relief in his tone. "I want to see if you were all right," Olivia said, moving closer but keeping her distance. She didn't want to spook him. "You looked upset the last time we met." His small shoulders slumped. "I'm okay. I just miss her." She hesitated. "Your mother?" Lucas nodded. His lips trembled, and he pressed them together as if trying to dam up a flood of emotion. Olivia's heart clenched. She knew nothing of Damien's wife, only that rumors said she passed away under tragic circumstances. Silence stretched, broken only by the muffled ticks of a clock somewhere in the mansion. A rustling sound startled them both. Footsteps approached from the hall. Panicking, Lucas scrambled to hide, but it was too late. The gallery door swung open, revealing a tall figure with eyes like storm clouds. Damien Blackwood, his jaw clenched, and the air charged with almost electric tension. "What," he said icily, "is going on here?" Olivia's throat went dry. Her first impulse was to shield Lucas, but fear rooted her in place. Lucas stood, bravely meeting his father's gaze. "Dad, don't be mad at her. I came here first." Damien's eyes flicked to Olivia. A flicker of fury, or perhaps pain, crossed his features. "Out," he commanded. The single syllable bristled with authority. Olivia opened her mouth to apologize, but the intensity of his glare robbed her speech. She bowed her head and hurried past him, heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She retreated to her cramped quarters, fear twisting her insides. She pictured Lucas's frightened face, and the guilt stabbed deeper. She had broken the unspoken rule and been caught. Any minute now. She expected Mrs. Fletcher to bang on her door with dismissal papers. Yet the hours ticked by with no summons. When morning came, Olivia did her tasks in anxious silence. Whispers drifted around the staff about a tense father-son confrontation the night before. Evidently, Damien had not fired her yet, but what was he planning? Late that afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher cornered Olivia by the laundry room. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you in his study," she said flatly. Her voice gave away nothing. A cold sweat broke out along Olivia's spine. She followed Mrs. Fletcher to a heavy oak door. She entered the room alone, swallowing hard. The study was furnished with dark wood leather armchairs and walls lined with law books and business volumes. Damien Blackwood stood by a tall window overlooking the estate's gardens. He turned when she stepped in, his posture rigid. For a moment, neither spoke. He gestured for her to shut the door. She obeyed, bracing herself for the worst. "Sit," he ordered, his voice even. She sank into an armchair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She couldn't meet his gaze for long. "I understand you've had some interactions with my son," he began, pacing behind the desk. "Lucas is not to be approached by staff. He's lonely," she interrupted, surprising even herself with her boldness. "He's a child who needs company, Mr. Blackwood." His glare could have frozen lava. "That isn't your concern." Olivia took a shaky breath. She knew she was risking her livelihood, but the memory of Lucas's sad eyes emboldened her. "Maybe not, but I can't pretend he's invisible. You can dismiss me if you wish. But please, don't blame Lucas. He's just—" "You're crossing boundaries," Damien snapped. He braced his hands on the desk, knuckles blanching. Then, unexpectedly, the anger in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something more vulnerable. "Pain." She softened her tone. "I'm not trying to cross lines, sir. I don't like seeing a child so isolated." A tense silence spanned several beats. She wondered if she'd pushed too far. Finally, Damien turned to gaze out the window, his voice laden with weariness. "He's better off this way." Before she could respond, he straightened and fixed her with a look that demanded obedience. "Focus on your job. Stay out of my personal affairs." He paused. "You may go." Relief and disappointment warred in her chest as she left the study. She had half expected to be fired on the spot. Instead, Damien's reaction left her even more puzzled. He was clearly protective of Lucas, yet his methods seemed cruel. She sensed that behind his icy exterior lay a man consumed by guilt or grief. Over the next week, Olivia tried to keep her distance, but fate seemed determined to throw them together. She found Lucas in the corner of the library, curled up with a book too advanced for his age. Another time, she caught him sneaking a cookie from the kitchen. Always, he glanced at her with that tentative trust, and she couldn't ignore it. One evening, she discovered him in one of the guest bedrooms, flipping through a photo album filled with images of a beautiful woman. Lucas's mother, no doubt. He was fighting tears, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Olivia's heart broke for him. Without a word, she knelt beside him, offering comfort with a gentle touch on his shoulder. That was how Damien found them, locked in a silent tableau of compassion. He strode in, face contorted with rage. "What makes you think you can interfere in my life?" he growled, grabbing Olivia's arm hard enough to make her wince. But she didn't flinch away. She raised her eyes to meet his. "Because your son is lonely, and so are you." Her quiet words cut through the anger, and for an instant his grip slackened. She saw the torment behind his eyes before he spun on his heel and stalked out, leaving Olivia and Lucas alone in the hush of the vast, sorrowful mansion. 3 days passed without any direct confrontation from Damien. Olivia sensed his presence, felt his gaze lingering on her whenever they crossed paths, but he kept his distance. The staff, however, buzzed with rumors. Something big was happening in Damien Blackwood's corporate empire. Whispers of a scandal circulated through the halls, growing more ominous by the day. One rainy afternoon, an unfamiliar visitor arrived at the estate, a bespectacled man in a tailored suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. Word spread quickly that he was Mr. Blackwood's top lawyer. Mrs. Fletcher instructed the staff to clear out the foyer, so Olivia retreated to a nearby alcove, inadvertently overhearing the conversation. "Public image is deteriorating," the lawyer said in clipped tones. "The tabloids are relentless, and the investors are skittish. We need a drastic measure to restore faith." Damien's voice was equally tense. "I've dealt with media smears before, but they've never hit this close to home." "Times have changed, Damien. People eat up salacious gossip on social media. Allegations, true or false, spread like wildfire. We need to project stability, especially family stability." A strained silence followed, broken only by the sound of thunder grumbling outside. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. "If the world sees you as a devoted family man, this entire scandal may dissipate. A wife by your side, a child in your arms, you'll appear untouchable again." Olivia's heart lurched. She dared not move, afraid the slightest noise would betray her eavesdropping. The idea of Damien conjuring up a fake relationship to salvage his reputation wasn't surprising, given his ruthless business instincts. But somehow, it felt even colder than she expected. She scurried away before the conversation ended, retreating to the staff quarters. All evening, her mind churned. Would Damien truly arrange a sham marriage for public relations? She tried to imagine him a glamorous socialite, someone who could match his icy demeanor and endure the constant flash of paparazzi cameras. Late that night, lightning split the sky. Olivia was on her way back from the laundry room when she nearly collided with Damien in the corridor. He seized her wrist before she could stumble, his eyes locking onto hers. She inhaled sharply at the tension crackling between them. "Come with me," he said, steering her toward his study without waiting for a response. The storm outside rattled the windows as he closed the door behind them. A single lamp cast shadows across the shelves of leather-bound books. He stood tall, posture stiff, as though preparing for battle. "I need to speak with you about something of grave importance." "Sit." She sank into the same armchair as before, her stomach twisting in knots. "Is this about Lucas?" "It's about my reputation." He gestured impatiently, as if that explained everything. "There's a scandal that could derail my businesses. My lawyer believes the public wants to see a softer side of me, a committed father and husband. It would protect Lucas, too. Give him a chance at a normal life without the press hounding us." Unease slithered through her. She could sense where this was going, and her voice wavered when she finally spoke. "Why are you telling me this?" He studied her, face impassive yet eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. "Because I'm asking you to marry me. Temporarily, of course." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. A boom of thunder shook the mansion. Olivia stared at him, struggling to process his words. "Marry you?" His tone was measured, as though delivering a carefully rehearsed speech. "It's a business arrangement. I'll compensate you generously for 1 year of marriage. You'll live as my wife, help me present a stable family image, and in return, you can ensure your mother gets the best care possible." She recoiled, equal parts flabbergasted and outraged. Her voice rose despite her attempt to keep it steady. "You think I'd trade my life for money? Become some trophy to wave in front of the media?" He clenched his jaw. "It's not like that." "It sure sounds like that," she countered, indignation flaring. I'm not a pawn for you to move around. I don't care how rich you are. Damien's eyes narrowed, though she sensed a flicker of something akin to desperation beneath his icy exterior. I'm offering you a way out of your financial struggles. Your mother's medical bills must be overwhelming. Don't deny it. Her heart squeezed. The mention of her mother's condition felt like a low blow, but she couldn't deny the truth. The bills were drowning her. She toyed with the hem of her apron, anger and fear warring within. You can't just buy... Enough, he growled, frustration surging. I've considered every angle. This is the simplest solution, and if you truly care about Lucas, you'll see the benefits. He needs a mother figure, someone who makes him feel less alone. That last statement tugged at her heartstrings. She recalled Lucas's sad eyes and the stifling loneliness of the estate. Still, it was madness. She was nobody, a housekeeper with mountains of debt and no illusions about living in a billionaire's world. Lightning flashed again, illuminating Damien's face. For a split second, she saw pain etched across his features before his stoic mask returned. I'm not forcing you, he said more softly, his voice tight. I'm giving you a choice. But decide soon or the offer's off the table. She rose shakily, head spinning. I need time to think. He gave a curt nod and turned away, dismissing her. She stumbled out, clutching the doorknob for support. Her mind reeled with questions that had no easy answers. Could she really sacrifice her pride for the money that might save her mother's life? And what about Lucas? Would it be so bad to offer him some sense of family, even if it was temporary? She hardly slept that night, torn between outrage and the grim reality of her financial desperation. By morning, she had reached a decision, though she hated herself for it. She found Damien in the study again. Without ceremony, she placed a trembling signature on the contract his lawyer provided. Her throat felt raw as she whispered, I accept. Damien lifted the papers, eyes scanning her signature. Then he met her gaze, his expression indecipherable. You belong to me now, Olivia, he said, an undercurrent of possessiveness in his tone. She felt a stab of resentment, mingled with relief. She had sold her freedom for a year. What had she gotten herself into? In the weeks that followed, Olivia's life changed beyond recognition. A discreet civil ceremony took place in a private room of the Blackwood Estate, witnessed only by the family lawyer and Mrs. Fletcher. No flowers, no music, no guests. It was a stark and emotionless affair that solidified her new identity. Mrs. Damien Blackwood. She traded her modest staff uniform for designer dresses Damien's personal shopper had delivered. The staff now addressed her as Madam, though many struggled to hide their shock. Rumors ran wild. Some whispered that Olivia was a gold digger. Others believed she had blackmailed Damien. In truth, she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. Her mother's medical bills were promptly paid by Damien's accountant, and a top specialist was hired to oversee her care. Gratitude wore with an unsettling sense of debt. Every time she saw a hospital invoice stamped, paid in full, her heart twisted. She was supposed to be the caretaker, not the one being taken care of. Damien remained distant yet polite. He had provided her with a spacious suite near his own rooms, but they rarely saw each other outside of official appearances. Company dinners, media release photos, and business events became part of her routine. Olivia found herself smiling dutifully at cameras, standing by his side with her arm looped through his, playing the adoring wife role to perfection. Oddly enough, the one bright spot was Lucas. The boy, initially wary, warmed to her. She read him bedtime stories, helped with homework, and gently coaxed him out of the shadows. Slowly, the halls echoed with his laughter once more. The staff tiptoed around this newfound warmth, uncertain how Mr. Blackwood would react. To her surprise, Damien didn't interfere. Often, she caught him observing them from afar, his gaze shadowed by an emotion she couldn't decipher. Occasionally, when Lucas insisted, the three of them would share a meal in a formal dining room. The silence awkward but slightly less frosty than before. The first time Damien introduced her, as his wife in public, was at a grand charity gala in the city. Olivia stepped out of a limousine onto a crimson carpet, feeling like an imposter. Lights flashed as paparazzi snapped pictures. Arm in arm with Damien, she forced a pleasant smile. She was acutely aware of his tense posture beside her, as though every muscle was clenched. The event brimmed with influential figures, business moguls, politicians, and celebrities. Olivia had never felt more out of place. She clutched her champagne flute, scanning the crowd. A suave businessman approached, complimenting her on her gown. He was charming, and she found herself laughing at a harmless joke. From the corner of her eye, she saw Damien's jaw tighten. His gray eyes flicked with jealousy, though he hid it behind a practiced smile. Still, she sensed his unease. When the man left, Damien snaked an arm around her waist, pulling her closer than he ever had before. "You're my wife," he murmured through gritted teeth. "You don't smile at other men like that." She bristled, meeting his gaze with defiance. "It's a fake marriage, remember? Isn't this what you wanted? For me to look friendly and charming." She tried to step back, but he only tightened his hold. His voice was low, dangerously soft. Friendly, not flirtatious. Heat flared in her cheeks. She yanked herself free, excusing her own twinge of jealousy at the memory of countless socialites rumored to be linked to him. "You have no right to dictate how I speak to others. Our arrangement—" She never finished. His mouth descended on hers, a sudden, possessive kiss that stole her breath. The world around them vanished. The prying eyes, the glittering chandeliers, the soft hum of music. For a moment, her heart hammered with a confusing blend of anger and longing. She had tasted the depth of his passion, a rawness that made her knees tremble. When he finally released her, his gaze smoldered. "Don't forget," he whispered, voice thick with suppressed emotion. "You're mine for this year." She should have slapped him, should have walked away. But her pulse fluttered wildly. Embarrassed and flustered, she stumbled toward the ladies' lounge to collect herself. Her reflection in the ornate mirror showed pink cheeks and parted lips, evidence of the desire that still coursed through her veins. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. Damien resumed his cool composure, shaking hands and making deals. Olivia stayed by his side, a swirl of conflicting emotions churning inside. She remembered the boy who needed them both, Lucas. That thought kept her grounded, reminding her of the reason she was enduring the charade. Back at the estate, she retreated to her suite, half expecting Damien to appear and either apologize or lash out. But he didn't. In the days that followed, he avoided discussing the incident, burying himself in work. Life fell back into its polished routine, though an undercurrent of unacknowledged tension simmered between them. But little by little, cracks appeared in Damien's icy facade. He once brought fresh flowers to her room, without comment. Another time, she found him quietly observing her and Lucas playing a board game, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Even more surprising was the night he joined them for story time, listening as Olivia read a fairy tale. Lucas beamed, snuggling close to both of them, unguarded for once. In those moments, Olivia glimpsed a man beneath the ruthless billionaire persona. Someone capable of love, laughter, and heartbreak. She wondered if she was seeing the remnants of who Damien had been before tragedy struck. Each day, she felt herself growing more attached, even as she reminded herself this was temporary. The contract said 1 year, and every passing moment brought her closer to the inevitable end. Still, the possibility of real feelings taking root scared her more than she cared to admit. She had expected an emotionless arrangement, but the lines were blurring, and the more they blurred, the more she realized she was risking her heart in a game that had started as pure business. As autumn leaves turned gold and scarlet across the sprawling Blackwood grounds, Olivia sensed the ticking clock of her contract echoing in her mind. Only a few weeks remained before the year was up. The transformation within the mansion was palpable. Lucas was happier. The staff seemed less on edge, and Damien, while still reticent, occasionally showed glimpses of warmth. One crisp afternoon, they held a small family gathering by the estate's pond, feeding ducks under the soft glow of a waning sun. Olivia laughed with Lucas as the ducks scrambled for breadcrumbs. She looked over to see Damien, watching them with a gentle light in his eyes. For a heartbeat, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, a real family moment. That evening, as the sky darkened, the estate glimmered with newfound softness. Olivia found herself alone on the terrace, gazing at the moonlight reflecting on the manicured gardens. Damien appeared behind her, silent as a cat. She sensed him before she saw him, the heat of his presence sending a shiver down her spine. "I've noticed you spend more time with Lucas," he said quietly, leaning against the railing. "He smiles more now." She offered a small smile of her own. "He's a special child. He just needed someone to see him." Damien exhaled softly, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "I failed him after—" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "After the accident. I didn't know how to cope with losing my wife, so I pushed him away. I thought shielding him from the world would keep him safe." Regret coated his words. Olivia's chest tightened. She reached out, placing a hand on his sleeve. "He doesn't blame you, you know. He just wants his father." He looked down at her hand, then gently covered it with his own. "Sometimes I can't bear to look at him. He has her eyes. Every time I see him, I'm reminded of what I lost." She sensed the depth of his guilt. She also recognized that this was the longest, most vulnerable conversation they'd ever had. "You don't have to go through it alone," she said, voice trembling. "You have him. You have me." Something flickered in Damien's expression. Hope, fear, or both. Without warning, he leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. In that quiet moment, words were unnecessary. She felt the weight of his sorrow, his longing, and perhaps a budding affection that mirrored her own. But reality intruded. The contract's end date loomed, and she couldn't banish the knowledge that she'd agreed to a temporary role in his life. She feared letting herself fall deeper, only to be discarded when a year ended. Days slipped by in a tender dance of closeness and uncertainty. One night, after tucking Lucas into bed, Olivia overheard Damien's lawyer in hushed conversation, reminding him that the contract was nearly fulfilled. Her heart clenched. Had Damien's feelings changed, or was he still bound by the pragmatic terms of their arrangement? Later, she roamed the halls aimlessly, thinking about her mother's improving health, about Lucas's joyous laughter, and about the once cold man who had shown glimpses of warmth. Then she heard something. The gentle strains of piano music from the third floor. It was the same haunting melody she'd heard those first nights in the mansion. Quietly, she climbed the stairs, those forbidden steps she had always avoided. The door to a dimly lit room stood ajar. Inside, Damien's figure sat at a grand piano, fingers gliding over the keys. He played with a painful tenderness that made her eyes sting with unshed tears. When he finally noticed her, he stopped, his posture rigid. "I used to play for my wife," he admitted, voice laced with sorrow. "After she died, I couldn't bring myself to touch the piano until you showed up." Olivia's throat tightened. She stepped forward, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Music can heal what words can't," she murmured. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the tension in the air a mix of grief and fragile hope. Their world felt balanced on the edge of a knife. Eventually, Damien stood and drew her into his arms. He kissed her softly, a far cry from the heated possessiveness at the gala, conveying vulnerability and longing. But the next morning brought heartbreak. Olivia discovered more documents slipped under her suite's door, amendments to the marriage contract, finalizing the dissolution. Her heart sank. She realized with crushing clarity that Damien intended to honor the original terms. Anger, sorrow, and a hollow ache filled her. Refusing to confront him directly, she packed her belongings that afternoon. If she was nothing more than a temporary fix to his public relations crisis, she refused to linger like an unwanted guest. She left a brief note for Lucas, promising to write and telling him how special he was. Then she steeled herself and dragged her suitcase toward the front door. Halfway across the foyer, footsteps pounded behind her. She turned to see Damien, hair disheveled, eyes wild with panic. "Where are you going?" he demanded, voice cracking. She lifted her chin. "My year is almost up. I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Pain flashed across his features. "You think I don't want you?" Tears blurred her vision. "I heard your lawyer. I saw the papers. You're preparing to end it. Don't act surprised." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I thought that's what you wanted. I never intended to trap you in this arrangement." "How can you be so blind?" she cried. "I wanted to believe there was something real between us. But I'm done fooling myself." Damien's face twisted with desperation. I was a fool, Olivia. I convinced myself you'd never choose to stay with me if you weren't bound by that contract. He paused, stepping closer. But I can't let you go. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. Just then, a small voice called from the top of the stairs. Olivia? Lucas stood there, tears shimmering on his cheeks. Don't leave, he pleaded, voice trembling. Olivia felt her resolve crumble. She looked at Damien, then at Lucas, torn between the safety of escape and the possibility of real love. Damien took her hand, his voice raw. Stay, not as part of contract. Stay because you want to. Because he swallowed, eyes shining with emotion she dared to hope was love. Because I need you. We both do. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Only if you promise to love me forever, she whispered. Damien exhaled shakily, pulling her into his arms. I promise, he murmured, sealing his vow with a kiss that spoke of heartbreak and healing, loss and redemption. Lucas rushed down, wrapping his small arms around them both. In that moment, the mansion no longer felt cold and foreboding. It was home, a place filled with love hard-won and precious. And as they stood together, the hush of the estate finally felt like peace rather than loneliness. The echo of a promise that this time, Damien Blackwood would fight to keep them both forever. The end. Enjoyed the story? We invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing more beautiful stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your effort. See you again.